Hello again, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a new interview with one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/thedirectorscut. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Tom Hooper's film, The Danish Girl. Based on the novel of the same name, Mr. Hooper's film portrays the lives of Lili Elbe and Gerda Wegner, two Danish artists in the 1920s whose lives are changed after Gerda depicts her husband, then known as Einar Wegner, as a woman in a series of paintings. Their involvement with the series inspires Lili to embark on a groundbreaking and emotional journey as a transgender pioneer. The Danish Girl was recognized this past weekend at the 88th Annual Academy Awards, when actress Alicia Vikander won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her role as Gerda. Following the Los Angeles membership screening of the film in November, Mr. Hooper spoke with director and DGA past president Michael Apted about the challenges he faced while making The Danish Girl. Listen on for highlights from their conversation, recorded at the DGA Theater. Enjoy!
Thank you. Well, sir, I think you nailed it, didn't you?
Thank you.
I mean, it looks like a big movie. The issues you deal with, the emotional, the psychological, the sense of scale, the sense of period, and all this must have cost a fortune, didn't it?
It was actually the same budget as The King's Speech, so just under $15 million.
What?
But for that we shot in 5 countries, so it was actually quite.
Well, how did you pull it off?
I mean, it was a tight schedule. It was 44 days, but what was difficult was it was 186 scenes in 44 days. So if you do the maths, that's 4 scenes a day. And in the UK, you don't really ever get to do overtime. And not just because people just don't really do it. It's a slightly different culture, so it's a strict 11-hour day. So partly it was, I'm a great believer in rehearsal, so we rehearsed for 3 weeks with the actors, and we rehearsed the film chronologically, so that when we had to go out of sequence, they kind of knew where they were. But also, I had a really great team. I've got a great first, Ben Howarth, who also did Les Mis with me, who was also the co-producer, and he's the kind of guy who, when the harder the challenge you throw him, the more his eyes light up. And if you throw an even harder challenge, he's on the tip of his toes, and that's the kind of first you want going into this situation.
I mean, do you shoot quickly? You must do.
Yeah, I mean, it was rarely more than 5 takes of any setup, and we shot with 2 cameras most of the time. But it was, there's something quite good about shooting at pace, because you never kind of you never give in to the neurotic side of your brain, and if you have to keep going fast, you have to keep working from instinct and not overanalyze things. And I think we all have. Well, I don't know. I don't speak for everyone, but I think all directors have the capacity to become neurotic if given too much time. So I think sometimes it's quite healthy to move fast.
You say you rehearse. How do you like to rehearse? Do you talk a lot, or do you move it around?
I mean, on this actually, the preparation started about a year out. Eddie Redmayne started his preparation about a year out, and we did our first screen test 7 months out. And then another 3 months out. So a lot of it was about just preparing it. But in rehearsals, I like to do it in the old school way of marking all the sets out on the floor in full scale, having the art department come up with a rather sort of dodgy set of props to represent the various sets, and do proper blocking rehearsals where we move it around.
And do you find that the different actors like to rehearse in different ways? And if that's true, how do you kind of keep them all happy?
Yeah, I certainly feel, rehearsals can depend on the person and also the person's attitude to what they're doing. I remember meeting Helen Mirren for the first time to direct her in Prime Suspect when I was quite a kid director, and we sat down, we had lunch, and I gave her this whole spiel about how passionately I believe in rehearsals and how central it is. And she looked at me and said, "I don't rehearse." And then I was already stuck because I'd already said we're going to do a week's rehearsal, and then when I worked with her again on Elizabeth I, she was like, "No, we must do lots of rehearsal on this because it's very important." So I think actors can open their minds up to it.
And how much?
But I think actually interesting. Just to go to a question, I think part of the fear of rehearsal sometimes is that an actor worries that they're going to produce something in rehearsal that they'll never recapture. I remember one actor who I won't name, who's quite famous English actor, saying his fear in rehearsals is that he would do something which he could never recapture, and that would haunt him. But the interesting thing about, for example, Alicia Vikander is that she's a trained ballet dancer, so she's got that. As a ballet dancer, you're not afraid of repetition because the perfection only comes from repetition. There's no way as a dancer you're going to get anywhere good without repetition. And so she had an extraordinary facility to not feel that the brilliant moment was vulnerable to repetition, and in fact could come out of it.
But were you on your guard in case you thought you were pushing it too much, or they were not going to discover anything, that you were grinding it down a bit?
I think the interesting thing is the moment you actually put a camera on the actors, it changes again. So that when you're watching it to your eye in the space, a bit like a theatre play, it feels like one thing, and then when you put a camera on it, it changes the energy. So I feel like you've still protected the moment because the moment only really happens when you put a camera on someone.
When did you start putting the cast together?
I fell in love with the script in late 2008 when I was very early preparation of the King's Speech, and it all came about because I was on my phone to my casting director Nina Gold, who's cast pretty much everything I've done since I was 21. She's just cast the Star Wars movie. We
love
amazing.
her, don't we?
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I was doing a thing that directors will relate to, which is complaining to close friends about the lack of great scripts. And she said, "Well, I know of one great unmade script. It's called The Danish Girl," and I read it and was incredibly moved by it and fell in love with it and sort of hoped to one day get to make it. But in that first reading, I imagined Eddie in the role. You know how sometimes you read a script and you picture an actor just to help your sort of imagination flesh out a story. And Eddie and I had worked together on Elizabeth I with Helen Mirren, and he was like 22 years old, and he played a young rebel who tries to overthrow Queen Elizabeth I, Queen Helen Mirren. It didn't go well for him. He's sentenced to death. But I remember shooting the scene where Eddie had the death sentence, and it was extraordinary. It was like watching someone being sentenced to death, watching a young man face the results of his impetuosity, and he was quaking like a leaf. The emotion was extraordinary, and he wasn't like an actor pretending to face death. And I remember thinking most English actors are in some kind of dialogue with their own reserve. You could say some of them are even emotionally repressed. Not like English directors, obviously, like me and Michael, who have a very fluent contact with our emotional life. But yeah, so Eddie stood out in this English tradition as being incredibly emotionally raw, and then I did Les Mis with him when his Empty Chairs, Empty Tables again had that incredible kind of emotional translucency, and I think that's what drew me to Eddie was this idea that he perhaps had the gift to bring us with Lili step by step, beat by beat, so that we'd have an empathic connection. And I think what he does is he makes Lili's emergence feel inevitable or necessary, and it's because you're always with him. And I didn't want Lili to be othered or to be made strange by an actor, and I think Eddie has that kind of compassionate gift. And then Alicia Vikander, I'd sort of seen her in Anna Karenina, and I'd seen her in A Royal Affair, and I got a very early look at Ex Machina, which is a fantastic film. I think she's brilliant in it. And she auditioned. We did the memorably titled Scene 56, which is when Gerda confronts Einar the morning after the ball where Lili kisses Henrik, and she was so moving in the first take that I actually got tearful, and Eddie Redmayne turned to me and said, "Well, there's not a lot of suspense about who you're going to cast, is there, Hooper?" And I was like, "No, I mean, I'm completely objective. Let's go again. I don't actually have any obvious notes, but let's go again anyway." So it was it was over right at the beginning.
But you were presumably surprised by how good she was at the...
Yeah, I mean, she has incredible heart and sort of compassion and kindness in her, and to me, the film at its centre is an examination of a very kind of profound, unconditional love, where Gerda always puts Lili first, and it's very selfless. And there was a scene, and there's a scene. I mean, the script kind of guided both of us in this, and there's a scene when Gerda comes home and finds Lili at the kitchen table dressed as Lili, and it completely shocks Gerda, but it's early on in the movie, and she's not, they've agreed that Lili should never come back, and even Alicia, said, yeah, and the first line in the script is "How are you?" in that scene, and even Alicia said, that can't work. I mean, I would be furious, I'd be betrayed, I'd be shocked, I'd be confronted, I'd have all these emotions, and Lucinda's saying that I would say, "How are you?" And I said, well, let's imagine, the writer's right for a moment, and
for once, yeah,
and what we realised is that Gerda is such, Gerda just had a sort of compassionate genius beyond all of us, and for her, she walks in and she doesn't see her husband dressed up, she just sees her partner in pain, and all she cares about is why Lili as Einar is in pain, and that's why she says, "How are you?" So and where I think Alicia was brilliant was in sort of pushing herself to kind of enlarge her already big heart to bring out this sort of love story at the centre.
Just to go back to Eddie, was any period of time when he was frightened of what he had taken on?
Every period of time.
So how did you nurse him through it?
I mean, Eddie's also, Eddie's sort of conscientious almost to a self-sabotaging degree in that he cared so much, not only about doing a good job, but he went out into the community and met trans women and trans men and heard their stories and began to realize how, he quickly realized how important the story might be for that community. And, but I think it's great, so he lives very close with his anxiety, but I think his great gift as an actor is, at the moment the camera rolls, he's free. Despite all the preparation, despite the fact that he'd read, every book he'd been given, he'd read books of academic gender theory. He was so well researched, but in the moment of acting, he's free, and he's not. His acting is not determined by his anxiety, and I often think that the difference between the really great actors and the less great is that the really great actors, their anxiety doesn't just get in the way in the moment, and it never gets in the way. I mean, like, it's 100% never gets in the way. And I could say to Eddie, I could come in and give him a note to completely kind of invert a choice he'd made, and the next take he can run that through and thread it through and give you a coherent version of it, and it doesn't throw him. So he's incredibly gifted in that way.
And what were the best notes you could give him?
I remember one. I mean, in the scene when Lili goes back to the operation for the second time, and she's chatting with Warner Cross in the hospital, and we were doing and Eddie was playing it quite sort of flippantly when she says, "I'd like a husband that looks like you. I'd like a child one day," and I sort of, and I think Eddie had this concern that we wouldn't see enough of Lili's joy before she died, and so was trying to capture that in that moment. And I said, just for the last take, filter your fear of death or the risk of what you're going through that, and ground it in the risk. And Eddie gave a completely different performance, and that ended up being in the film. But also, that there was one pickup we did in that scene, not at the time we shot the scene, which is the moment when Lili breaks down at the end and weeps. I've got a brilliant editor, Melanie Oliver, who's now, this is the 6th film she's cut for me. She did the whole of John Adams, all 9 hours of it, single-handed, which is extraordinary, with 2 young kids. And she said to me, I'm still worried that we're seeing Lili's bravery and her, her front-footedness, but we're not seeing what lies behind the effort that lies behind it. And so we decided to shoot a continuation of that scene where we see what lay behind it. So, which in a way came out of that early note I gave to Eddie, which was the anxiety that we couldn't see the cost of the risk.
I mean, his performance is so carefully figured out. I mean, every breath he takes in a scene. Did you have to monitor that, or was he completely in charge of that?
I think the thing that I talked about a lot was that I didn't want it to feel like, a man was transforming into a woman. That I was more interested in the idea that the woman was always present and had been completely suppressed, and he had to put on this sort of this armor of masculinity for years, and the contact with the dress and the stockings awakens this person underneath. And so for me, it was about kind of revealing rather than transforming. And so some of the detailed work was about trying to get a feeling like he was actually relaxing into something rather than stretching off something. But at the same time, there was another theme that we were exploring, which from our meetings with trans women, they talked about this really interesting idea that you can go through a period in transition of hyperfeminization, where in order to reconnect with your femininity, you kind of overreach and you become, highly, almost too feminine or slightly affected, and your clothes become very, very feminine. And it's a bit like a kind of going through adolescence as a girl, where you're trying different things out. But we thought it'd be interesting to have this process of him kind of almost going a little bit too far, and then having the confidence to sit back in herself and become sort of more centered and more contained.
I mean, when you started out this film, I mean, looking at it, I mean, it's so full of challenge. When you started it, what did you think would be the most challenging thing for you?
It's interesting because it was a film. I mean, Gail Mutrix, my wonderful producer, optioned the novel in 2000. So for her, it's been a 15-year journey to get this to the screen. For me, I'm a newbie with a 7-year journey. And she encountered lots of obstacles in terms of people not wanting to finance it, people not wanting to, directors before me backing off directing it. And I think it reflects a kind of, I suppose, a prejudice in the culture that people just felt this is a story that's it's not going to be embraced by the public, and I hope the world's now moved on. But even people close to me were sort of feeling that it was possibly too risky a film for me to do, and whereas I just felt after The King's Speech and Les Miserables, when I was lucky to have those 2 films doing well, I had a kind of moment in time when I could get a passion project financed. And if I'd done a commercial film at that point, that wouldn't have been a difficult choice because people would have been keen for me to do it. But I wanted to use this moment to get a film that was less obvious made. But I think my fear was that you wouldn't. My fear would be that you wouldn't relate to Lili at every step, and that somehow it would remain. It would remain strange and mysterious and other and sort of over there and kind of very curious, an object, she could be a subject of great curiosity, but I didn't want to make that film. I wanted to make a film that felt very connected, and more than that, I wanted you, the audience, to sort of feel the more universal themes, because I suppose to me, weirdly, the 2 films, the King's Speech and the Danish Girl, which I both fell in love with around the same time, share a kind of common ground, which is, all of us have blocks between us and the best version of ourselves or the true version of ourselves, whether it's shyness or insecurity, whether it's anxiety, addiction, depression, whether it's stammering like in the King's Speech, but to not identify with the gender you're assigned at birth. I mean, I don't think a human being can experience a more profound block between them and their true identity, and it's a cause of such profound distress. But like in The King's Speech, when there's that sort of loving friendship of Lionel Logue and the love of the wife, what really interested me is in the 1920s, at a time where the word transgender didn't exist, when there was no roadmap for change, when the medical establishment absolutely did not accept this and pathologized it as an illness. The space that might allow this transformation to happen, I think, was created through love. Because I feel like if you are blocked as a person in any way, even a small way, if you have the luck to be truly loved in your life or truly seen, then change can be possible.
So you dealt with that challenge, as it were. Were there any things that happened during the course of making the film which were challenges that you hadn't anticipated?
I think possibly... we had an early, very inspiring meeting through Eddie with Lana Wachowski, and Lana, because Eddie had worked with Lana on Jupiter Ascending, and she was amazing. She spent a couple of hours with me and Eddie and gave us a reading list, but also talked about some of the potential pitfalls of making the film, and one was this idea that the audience might come away and just think being transgender is just a tragic condition, and we had to, and she made the rather interesting point. She said, you don't take the King's Speech point, through to Bertie dying of lung cancer. You kind of end it in a good place. And I felt with this that because the death was direct result of the operations, it was part of the story. But I felt very strongly, and Eddie felt strongly, that we had to show the joy of the process and not just the tragedy of it. And I think Eddie was very concerned about that. And I think possibly when there was a point when I was looking at the edit coming together where I think we were sort of going after the joy of it to almost too much, and we weren't in contact with the anxiety and the stakes. And the pickup that I talked about, which we did towards the end, was an example of trying to get that balance right. But in essence, directing it was about the balancing of the balancing of pain and joy. I mean, a really good example is the scene where Lily puts the stockings on, and then when she's Einar, and then holds the dress against herself. And Eddie, directing Eddie was all about trying to get both. So that on the one hand, Lily was kind of making contact with this extraordinary possibility of a happiness that she'd never experienced, which is her true identity. But on the other hand, the implications in the present of this discovery were going to clearly, have caused tremendous pain both to her and the marriage, and that even flowed into the score with Alexander Desplat, who did, who's wonderful to work with, and he struggled for a while because initially he went too dark, and then it was like, well, what are we saying? Is the music saying that making contact with your true identity is this dark, troubling sequel? That's not right. Then he went into the kind of beautiful place, and it felt somehow patronizing or condescending. And for him, it was about the same thing of trying to hold both. And I think that was probably. It took me time to realize that was my main challenge.
So you talk about this crew that you have, Danny, you have, and Eve Stewart and Melanie Oliver. How does it work? Do they wait for you to have a film, or do you wait for them to be free?
Well, I mean, this film is the product of a lot of long-term collaborations. Danny Cohen, this is the 5th film we've done together. Eve Stewart, it's the 5th film. Paco Delgado, the costume designer, we worked on Les Mis together, and I discovered him there. I mean, what I love about long-term collaborations is you're kind of picking up a conversation where you left off creatively, and there's a shorthand of you kind of know if you're trying to push yourself to do something different before, as that person was there when you did the thing before, it's easier to not repeat yourself because they're very aware of what you did last time.
How do you make it work? I mean, how do all your schedules suddenly coalesce into this?
Partly because Ben Howarth, my first. At one point, the film was pushed back 5 months, and he waited 5 months and didn't take a film so he could do it with me. And so partly they've been amazing at creating space and waiting. But I think Danny, the cinematographer, did a particularly amazing job because I sort of wanted I was very inspired by the paintings of Hammershoy, who was a Danish artist a tiny bit before the time of Gerda and Einar. And Hammershoy does these extraordinary kind of paintings, mainly of his own of figures in his own apartment, and it's all painted in this sort of incredibly austere palette of blues and greys, and it's about figures in these spaces and the perspectives of corridors, and there's a great sense of sort of loneliness and isolation in a beautiful way, and the light is super soft. I mean, the most extraordinary ethereal light, and of course that's also Scandinavian. The northern light is, particularly in the long summers, has this softness, and so I charged Danny with this idea of lighting in that way, and Eve Stewart came up with the idea of building a set for them that reflected that tone, because I wanted Lili as Einar. Yes, she's in a happy marriage, but I wanted there to be something in the physical surroundings that was somehow muted or constrained, and the austerity of the Danish colour scheme spoke to that. And then, in fact, Lana Wachowski gave us the idea for the Paris section, where she said to me, wouldn't it be amazing if when you went to Paris you used the Art Nouveau as the backdrop, because the Art Nouveau was all about the rejection of the masculine in design, of the straight line, of the rectilinear, the embracing of the feminine, and the floral and explosions of colour, and so so we set the emergence of Lili against this backdrop in the revolution of visual arts in the 20th century, which was all about the upsurge of the feminine, and Eve Stewart then said, well, the best place to do that is Brussels, because it actually has better Art Nouveau architecture than Paris, so we went to Brussels rather than Paris. But where she's smart, I mean, like, going back to how do we do it on the budget, I mean, Eve is a great pragmatist, and she said, we can only build a little bit. We built the 2 apartments, and unless you walk into a location which is extraordinary on camera straight away, we'll never have the money to create these places. So it's better to go to the city that has them than scrabble around trying to build sets or trying to do it in London when it's not going to look right. And also, she's extraordinary. I mean, the Paris apartment was a build. She bought the Paris apartment, I kid you not, on eBay. I mean, in that she bought the set of flats that was made, that was stuck in some like farm covered in chicken shit, and she bought it for practically nothing. And the rest of her team were like, if I typed in, Paris apartment for sale on eBay, nothing, that doesn't come up. But for Eve Stewart, it comes up. And anyway, so they were very, she's incredibly inventive at doing stuff for a budget.
In my research for this little event, I did come across one shocking fact. On Wikipedia, it said the running time was 2 hours, 52 minutes.
Oh my God.
Was that just a clerical error, or did you have more material than you felt you needed?
No, that's a slightly alarming clerical error. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
But did you have time problems with it?
Yeah, I mean, it was the first cut was close to 3 hours, but it came down pretty easily. It wasn't. I mean, Les Mis was a lot harder to tame, but this came down because in the end, the essential story is relatively simple, and so we could kind of home in on that quite fast in the cutting room.
Well, it's a terrific job. Can you judge it now? Do you look at it and think, how did I get through this, or is this what I wanted, or?
I don't know. I always find that the funny thing about when I watch films, even years later, is I'm always right back with the last process that I did. So I tend to be back thinking about the mix and the grade, all the special effects, because that was the last thing I touched.
Did you have a lot of visual effects in it?
5 shots, I think.
That's amazing. Are you telling me the truth?
Yeah, I mean 5 in terms of proper. Not. I mean, little pulling out a satellite dish. Obviously, there's more of those.
During this early period, you read the book, and it was with other directors after you read it? I mean, did you know about it and you knew it was out in the marketplace? No,
I mean, Gail wanted me to do it and was incredibly patient, and I said to her, look, Gail, I'm going off and doing this tiny movie called The King's Speech. I don't know if anyone's going to see it. I'm sure it's not going to get in the way of us, doing this film, very soon. And then she had to sort of suffer the stress of knowing that I probably was getting offered the odd other thing alongside the Danish Girl. But she was, she was amazing and her passion also was very powerful for me. because it when someone believes in the material so much, it also affects you.
We've got a couple of minutes. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have done?
I mean, maybe about some of the supporting cast.
It was brilliantly cast. Nina knows what she's up to.
Yeah, I mean, Matthias Schoenaerts, I thought was,
Yeah. When did he come into?
Well,
the picture?
it was funny because the day I cast Alicia or offered her the part, I was in a kind of we went for a drink in the Firehouse in London, and Matthias Schoenaerts was there, and Alicia was like, "Oh, Matthias," and they're old friends, and I looked at them as a couple. And I thought, God, wouldn't that be amazing if he played Hans? Not even beginning to think for a moment he'd ever say yes. So I didn't even kind of act on this. And then literally about 3 months later, I said to Nina, do you think he might say yes? And she said, no, he'll never say yes. And I said, well, should we just offer it to him anyway? And she said, well, I think you're wasting your time. And I said, well, and so we did, and he said yes. And but he's got a kind of incredible. What I loved about Matthias is there's nothing. He's totally non-competitive when he acts. What I mean is there's some actors you feel at some level they're going, you're doing that, well, I'm gonna raise you, and he's so kind of confident in himself that he's able to be utterly still and let the other person be the focus. And I know Eddie said that he really enjoyed acting with Matthias. And then there was Sebastian Koch, who, if you remember the film Lives of Others, played the Doctor, and he's one of the great German actors. And it was fun getting this. And Ben Whishaw playing Henrik, so I thought also he's one of my favorite actors. And the nicest thing is, I don't know, as a director, you kind of there are these actors you want, you for years think, God, I'd love to work with, and it was great getting three of them alongside Eddie and Alicia in this.
Well, the gods were with you.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations, and just a tip. I think you better get your dinner jacket out and brush it off. Anyway,
Thank you.
Good luck with all that, and I hope the film does very well for you.
Thanks, Michael.
Brilliant job.
We hope you enjoyed listening. You can watch a video of this and many other director Q&As on our YouTube channel or on our website at dga.org/events. Also on our website, you can explore our visual history program with long-form oral history interviews that delve deep into the careers of veteran DGA members. The interviews are searchable by keywords and topics and presented with selected highlights. The moderator from this episode, Michael Apted, is the subject of our most recent interview, where he discusses his revolutionary documentary series, 7 Up, and directing feature films like Gorillas in the Mist, Coal Miner's Daughter, and the James Bond installment, The World Is Not Enough. Check out the program at dga.org/craft/visual history. If you're enjoying The Director's Cut, please subscribe to it on iTunes or our SoundCloud page so you won't miss an episode. And leave us a review. We love to hear your feedback. We hope you hear from us soon. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.